The Call to Arms, Ideals and Illusions, Part 1. The summer of 1914 was not merely warm, it was incandescent. The sun blazed down upon the cobbled streets of Market Quay, a heat that seemed to ripen the air with a dizzying mix of patriotic fervor and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Life, for the young men of the town, felt less like a measured passage of time and more like a fuse waiting for a glorious spark. When the spark finally came, the official declaration of war, it wasn't met with dread, but with a collective, exhilarating roar. The euphoria of the square. Arthur Pendleton leaned against the damp stone of the old fountain in the town square, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was an apprentice baker, 20 years old, with flour perpetually dusting the cuffs of his trousers and an intellect that seemed ill-suited to kneading dough. Beside him stood Thomas Miller, his lifelong friend, a man built like a Shire horse, with hands calloused from his work at the local shipyard. "Hear that, Artie?" Tom boomed, practically vibrating with excitement. He gestured towards the hastily erected platform where a local dignitary, the perpetually flushed Alderman Heath, was reading the official proclamation. "We're in it! By Christmas, we'll be drinking German beer in Berlin! Heath just said it! A swift victory! Over before the leaves fall!" Arthur nodded, though a small chilly doubt pricked at the edges of his optimism. He found Tom's certainty infectious, however. Tom saw the world in high contrast colors, good and evil, work and rest, king and kaiser. The gray areas, the complexities that Arthur tended to linger on, were simply irrelevant to Tom. "I heard the colonel at the recruitment tent say it's a great adventure," Arthur murmured, pushing a stray lock of brown hair from his forehead. "He said the French girls would be waiting with flowers." Tom let out a booning laugh that turned several heads. "Flowers and a hero's welcome. It's what we were born for, Artie. It's the chance to finally do something, to prove we're not just boys pushing carts." He clapped Arthur on the shoulder with a force that almost knocked the smaller man off his feet. "We enlist, right now, together. The Market Quay boys, first to the front!" The idealism of enlistment. The recruitment tent, a flapping canvas monstrosity emblazoned with a Union Jack, was swarming. The queue stretched down the street, a river of young men, clerks, farmhands, dock workers, all buzzing with the same frantic energy. The atmosphere was less military necessity and more a festive outing. There were jokes, competitive boasts, and the intermittent off-key singing of patriotic songs. The sense of being part of something vast, something historically significant, was overpowering. When they finally reached the desk, Tom stood tall, his chest puffed out. The sergeant, a weary-looking man named O'Malley with a drooping mustache, barely glanced up as he rattled off the basic questions. "Name? Thomas Miller. And I'll take a spot in the infantry, rifle in my hands. Age? 21, Sergeant. Ready to fight for king and country." Sergeant O'Malley barely bothered to check the paperwork, simply making a quick notation and pushing a pen towards him. Duty, honor, glory. These words, printed in bold typeface on the recruitment poster behind the desk, seemed to hover in the humid air like promises. Tom signed with a flourish that threatened to tear the paper. Arthur, stepping up next, was smaller and slighter, and he felt a momentary, silly fear that he would be rejected. Arthur Pendleton, 20. The sergeant finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over Arthur's lean frame. "Bit thin, son. Need to put some meat on those bones if you're carrying a pack." He sighed, already looking past Arthur to the next eager volunteer. "Still, every hand's a help. What's your motivation, lad? Say the line for the record." Arthur didn't repeat the expected platitude of king and country. He thought of the old dusty history books he cherished, of the old tales of chivalry, of a chance to escape the monotonous predictability of his life in the bakery. "A call to arms," Arthur said, his voice stronger than he felt. "A chance to see the world made right, Sergeant. A swift, true victory for For the right ideals." Sergeant O'Malley didn't smile. He just pushed the pen forward again. "Right. Ideals pay as much as boredom. Next." As they stepped away, two freshly signed recruits, a brass band started playing a rousing march down the street. The crowd cheered, and suddenly two young women, sisters Alice and Clara, whom Arthur had long admired from afar, rushed forward. They pinned small, bright ribbons on the lapels of the new recruits. "For luck, Thomas. For honor, Arthur," Clara said, her eyes shining with admiration. Her gaze held Arthur's, and for a glorious, brief moment, he felt a hero, a knight-errant embarking on a sacred quest. He wasn't just Arthur the baker, he was Arthur, defender of civilization. The illusion of preparation. The barracks at Sandhurst were chaotic, deafening, and intensely masculine. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, wet wool, and cheap tobacco. For the first few weeks, the reality of military life was jarring, but still filtered through the sheen of excitement. The training was rudimentary, a rapid-fire attempt to turn civilians into soldiers before the swift victory was achieved without them. They learned to march, mostly out of sync. They learned to fire a rifle, usually missing the target entirely. They were taught to salute, which they did with a sloppy, self-conscious eagerness. Their drill instructor, a massive man named Corporal Hayes, perpetually red in the face, would rant at them for their incompetence, but even his fury seemed tempered by a shared, cheerful delusion. "You lot are the worst shower I've ever seen," Hayes would bellow, his voice echoing across the parade ground. "But it doesn't matter. We'll just march you up to the lines, and the Hun'll run when he sees your ugly mugs." Tom thrived. He loved the rough camaraderie, the clear hierarchy, and the physical exertion. He was a natural soldier, loud and unflappable, instantly popular. Arthur, however, began to observe the cracks in the facade. He watched the older reservists, men who had seen service in colonial skirmishes, who never participated in the patriotic songs and whose eyes held a deep, quiet weariness. He noted that the new rifles felt less like instruments of destiny and more like heavy, complicated pieces of steel. Yet he pushed the doubts down. He had committed. He had a ribbon on his coat and a promise of glory in his pocket. One evening, Arthur sat on his bunk struggling to write a cheerful letter to his mother when Tom returned from the mess hall, his face flushed with triumph. "We're moving out, Artie. Orders just came down. Deployment to France next week," Tom crowed, stripping off his heavy tunic. "We're not going to miss it. We're going to be the ones to break the back of this Kaiser. Think of it. Christmas in Paris, not Market Key." Arthur looked at the small, cheap watch he kept by his pillow. It was mid-September. The leaves had begun to turn. A vibrant, deceptive gold. The war had not been over before the leaves fell. It was a tiny, insignificant detail, but it was the first concrete lie in the beautiful illusion they had all bought into. "France," Arthur whispered, the words sounding both magnificent and terrifying. "Yes," Tom exclaimed, "the grand adventure!" He grabbed Arthur's letter and scrawled a massive, cheerful postscript below Arthur's signature. "Tell everyone, we're coming home heroes!"